Hi, Grace Lynch. This is part three of the ideas about trauma-informed trust recovery. And then, so using the unchangeable fact of my trauma experiences, with enough practice, then I had a new relationship with how to consider the trauma before, during, and after it got triggered. And interesting thing had been that I came to understand that before I developed this relationship with the trauma, the practice I had been doing is to take an experience that happened in the present that triggered the trauma, and then it was like a magic trick. Once I saw how it triggered something in the past, I would dismiss the thing in the present and say, oh, this is affecting me because it reminds me of thus and such. That's actually a very naive way to approach things. And so once I mined the experiences, once I had the structure to evaluate past experiences, not to resolve the trauma, but to resolve my sobriety, I began to have a much finer and more engaged and organic relationship with all of my memory life. And then I started to discover that when things triggered me in the present, reminding me of the past, one of the parts I had been leaving out in dealing with the things in the present was that just because an experience reminded me of something in the past in a devastating way does not mean that the experience that happened to me was not also its own toxicities. And I had been throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Some things would happen that I'd let slide because they reminded me of trauma. So I'd assume that the experience in the present was fine, but it reminded me of a bad experience. The problem with that is that once I had found the bad experience that it reminded me of, I would end up co-signing whatever had happened to me in the present. And once I started actually being with my traumatic experiences, not in terms of what happened, but in terms of getting to know who I was in the process of being changed by the experience inside the experience, I carefully inventoried my physical sensations inside the trauma. I inventoried the emotions that I felt. I inventoried the thoughts that came out of the emotions, the beliefs that came out of the thoughts, and I carefully wrote them down. And I took a lot of time to be with each of these devastating experiences, not for the purpose of simply reliving and rehashing them, but because what I quickly found was that I had looked at trauma, any of my traumas, in terms of like a video camera that panned the room. And when I talked about it, I would talk about what happened to me. The problem is that sobriety had taught me that the past is no longer happening. So if I have a cognitive model that treats trauma in terms of what happened before, it's no longer happening, but my emotional state is happening now, and I'm actually motivated to deal with my trauma because of what I'm feeling now, then the framework I have for dealing with the trauma is like going to a gas station for a wedding cake. The part that's affecting me now, that's motivating me to work with the trauma, is happening now. Therefore, framing what I'm trying to fix in terms of something that is long past is it's not possible. It's not possible that what's long past literally as the thing in the past is affecting me now because the past isn't happening anymore. And once I question that narrative, that I live in a kind of narrativistic relationship with past experiences because they let me talk with other people about it, but never actually get to the meat of it, I question the narrative and realize that as long as I have, it was sort of like when I was processing past abusers. My problem with abusers was that when I tried to process the experiences with them, I essentially ended up fighting and being in these engagements that were never ending, sometimes with people that were dead. And I found for myself that that's impractical. I found that I was imprisoned to framing my reactions in this way. The feelings I was having, I was treating as if I was in a conflict with somebody who was long dead. And my sobriety gave me a choice. I could leave it like that or not, because it was my life. I could stay in that reactivity as long as I want. And when I didn't want to stay in that reactivity anymore, I began to question my own thinking around what was actually happening. And I realized that it's impossible. Whatever I've been telling myself, however secure it made me feel and in control about what I was feeling in terms of things not happening anymore, it's their fault, they did this, that, and the other. It did not give me agency to actually deal with what I was processing. I didn't know what that agency would be. I just knew that my thinking could not possibly be the case. I used logic and direct experience, and I sort of had to dismantle that. But if my relationship with my feelings and the experience are not the narrative, then I had to go back. And if it wasn't about what was happening around me inside the experience, I considered the possibility that I need to go back and re-experience what the experience was about and get to know myself inside there and ask myself as I go through it what it really felt like, the sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, and the beliefs. I had to write them down because I had not made a place for them the first time. I had to get to know who I was with who I am now. I had to explore how my the way that I understood the experience at the time had been playing a role in the way I treated myself in the world from then on, and it was a whole thing. But the beautiful part of that is that as I became able to do that, it was sort of like learning a new skill. Then I started finding when my memories functioned properly that I was less at the mercy of narratives. And as a consequence, when I looked at my own recovery life, I had a challenge in participating in traditional 12-step recovery because I I could only understand addiction in terms of something that when I genuinely wanted to do something else, not paying attention to it at all, I still found my way back. See, and then when I had some kind of thing I could not understand, some kind of, if it was alcohol, if it was drugs, if it was emotions, sex, codependency, whatever the thing was that bothered me, then I didn't have a functional way to explore what that was up to this point, because all the ways that I'd heard talk about these things talked about it as if anybody could experience the addiction that I'm talking about. And they could, but they couldn't experience it from the perspective of an autistic, aphasic trauma survivor. And the challenge I had was in terms of creating fellowship with people that we didn't have a common ground around what the problem was. I couldn't change that. I found when I talked about my things that came out of my sobriety, my recovery, I got told that these are outside issues, even though I'd go to meetings and hear people talking about their cats or talking about their jobs and not tie together how the thing that bothers them connects to their recovery from whatever the particular focus of the 12-step meeting was. And so that became a problem for me because I couldn't tell other people that they're engaging in an outside issue in the meeting because there was a norm around that, some kind of social something. But I couldn't participate from my things that I didn't think were outside issues because they were received that way. And because of that, I started to shift my understanding of what my 12-step recovery had to be about from a collective experience and a social experience to an individual one. And I found that very slowly I had to get to know my recovery all over again. Not in terms of something that I could rationally, linearly, narrativistically understand and thus gain power over. Something, though, that I had to make peace with and not understand so that I could live inside the experience of it and then use the program, the power of the program, the principles of it, to re-understand myself in light of the truth of the larger problem that I was powerless over, that was making my life unmanageable. And ultimately, those kinds of problems were things that if I was truly powerless, then the powerlessness was something that I couldn't fix with understanding. And the unmanageability of it drove me to reckon with it anyway. And when I couldn't change the focus of it, then the effect of that became something, a touchstone that I could use as a fact of my own life to re-understand myself. And then I had to go through the work of getting to know myself all over again in light of the larger context of an unsolvable problem, or many of them. So That's part three.